Katie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So awesome to have you on Groundwork. For people that are familiar with the Groundwork show, I'm in a different location with a lot less of my equipment today. I'm on the road. I'm at my in-laws' house, and they've let me use their library as a spot for recording this. So shout out to them first. But very excited to have you here, and really excited to dig into all of your experience in the short time that we have. So maybe we could just start with you talking a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I've had a long journey, to be honest. If you can imagine, I actually started way back in the day when partners weren't really called partners, right? They were channel or just channel by itself or distributors or, things like that. So I actually started with a marketing agency and we were hired on by Sprint and AT&T and Oakley and GoPro to essentially manage their entire distribution channels and create, marketing campaigns for them, create all of their strategy, what their, entire marketing structure looked like through those distributors, aka channel, aka partnerships. So I'm old school. I'm used to the days where we built the events and the actual spaces, and brought that forward for them. And then that fast forward to now, it's kind of taking me straight into the technology space. Right after that agency, I went on to Ingram Micro and I built out their entire cloud partner ecosystem, their partner university, what that looked like. It was super fun to do that because it was a startup within a massive organization, multi billions, right? So that was a fun experience, and then after that, it just kind of trailed off into quite a few other areas. Right, I've been with big and small, anywhere from middle of the road, publicly traded private equity as well. And like today, I'm in startup, which is great. All about creating that partner ecosystem and where that's taken us to, and what's that brought to the table. So
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah,
And I would love to. I think both of us kind of entered the workforce at a similar time.
yes,
And that was, by the looks of it, 2008, which was the last economic meltdown.
yes.
And like, given that we're talking to people I know that are coming out of college at the moment and looking for roles, some similar themes.
Yeah.
And I would love to just start by talking about that, like what it was like, especially in the digital agency space, which is frothy at the best of times.
Yes.
What it was like entering the workforce during that environment, and like looking back, any similar themes.
So wild, to be honest. There's a lot of similarities to what's happening today, but also wildly different. When I first started, it was much more scrappy, get in the weeds. You're using all of your creative juices to come up with these quippy, partner programs and marketing aspects and campaigns. And it was a lot more of this in your face stuff, right? And it's kind of that traditional marketing that you used to think of. What you're seeing today is so different because it's much more of a community aspect. It's much more of a, you're getting that trust from somebody else, or somebody else's recommendation. It's not just because they're in your face and saying, "Ooh, flashy, look at us," right?
Hmm.
I think that that's where I've seen the biggest difference, especially in that B2B space of the buyer personas and what that behavior looks like. So getting into the space now is just completely different because you're almost having to change your mentality from, like I said, that ooh shiny syndrome to how can I create trust? How can I work with those around me? How can I work with my peers to
Hmm.
really bring in the value and the revenue in a different way? Um, so, anybody that's joining today, honestly, my go to is you always want to just start ground level and work your way up. And the reason why I say that is because, regardless of your title or the level that you're at in the organization, you're going to know the in the weeds issues because you started there. And because you did, it gives you a really unique perspective. So when you get to that leadership position, you can actually say, no, this is not worth our time. Yes, this is worth our time. And this is how we're going to do it. I feel like that has been just so valuable, at least in my career, just starting again, very, very bottom level and working my way through, the ranks and
Mhm.
everything, all the learnings that come with it, right? Being a leader is not all fun and games, by the way. I always tell all the newbies like that because they're always striving, like, I want, a team and all this. I'm like, yeah, it's not as fun as it sounds. But I always encourage, any type of career growth or whatever, aspirations they have. And I try to cultivate that as much as possible. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And so working it, I've partnered a lot with marketing agencies,
yes.
particularly when I was at Optimizely, but also a little bit at Amplitude as well. Would be interesting to hear, like, because it looks like you were managing partnerships on the other side of that.
Yes.
Like, who were some of your partners back then? Like,
Oh my gosh. So I kind of mentioned a little bit. So we had at my very first agency, our
yeah,
biggest focus was kind of the extreme sports. So
interesting.
we had GoPro, we had Oakley, we had Boost Mobile and Virgin Mobile, which was obviously a part of Sprint at the time.
Yeah,
AT&T was a part of that because at the time, that was when they were sponsoring Travis Pastrana
yeah,
and, they were trying to be cool and, hitting that market, right? So for whatever reason, we just had a lot of those clients, mainly from word of mouth, because you know how agencies are, right? They work with somebody and they go somewhere else to the next organization and they say, I want to work with that agency again because they developed, they essentially made me look good.
yeah.
Um, so we also had Yamaha, we had KTM, we had all kinds of stuff. It was actually really fun. It was a super fun time. And to start there was really great because I had a little bit of experience with all the different industries, right? So I had, the tele space, I had, the electronic space with GoPro, I had even, with Oakley, that retail space and
Mhm.
e-commerce and all of that. And then Ingram Micro, which was my next, move, was one of our clients as well because they were looking to become a little bit more cool in the cloud space, right? Because at the time, that was before they really had a cloud business. They were just starting to break into that. It was kind of the new shiny thing. But they knew that they were really outdated and old school. And so they came to a marketing agency like us. And a lot of that was, again, word of mouth. It happened to be one of the folks that we worked with at Yamaha ended up moving over to Ingram Micro. And then he had said, hey, we'd really love to work with you again. So that's kind of what broke us into that space as well. Um, so yeah, it was fun though. It was really, lots of travel, a lot of trade shows, a lot of, again, that kind of creative in an actual whiteboard room, by the way, not today's Miro boards and all this stuff, right? I'm talking physically in a room, writing on a board, drawing things up, coming up with all kinds of really fun stuff. So it's always a great place to start. But being on that side was really interesting because, like I said, it gave you a really good exposure to all the different industries at
Yeah.
once. And it also kind of gave you a little bit of an expertise in each.
Mhm.
Not necessarily saying that you're, the Yoda of that space, but you had to know enough to be dangerous. And so you kind of became a good generalist and then you would take those different playbooks across those industries, in different ways. But a lot of them, it's a lot of the same stuff. You just have to apply it slightly differently for a different audience.
Yeah,
Um,
and were there any tech companies that you partnered with, like, that you, like, felt like did a good job of partnering with you, I guess, for your customers? Or
So at the agency,
yeah.
I would say, all of them did a pretty good job at the time. I think that our best one, Ingram Micro was a really solid partner for us, and a client for us
Mhm.
because they essentially just said, here, we don't know what we want to do, figure it out. And what happened out of that was, because I had worked on it for so long through our agency, they ended up just saying, "Hey, can we just hire you full time, bring you in house? You're clearly onto something here with, the programs that you're building, the different revenue streams that you're producing, and now we have this huge opportunity to develop it even further." So it was a really interesting way to cross over from that agency side to the client. And then it was almost a similar feel, because at Ingram, right, we know they're just a massive distributor of all of these different other products. So on the cloud space, right, the folks that I was working with most were Adobe, Google, Microsoft, right? Those were my clients and partners at the time, where they would come in and say, "How do we get access to all of your resellers? How do we get their attention? How can we get them engaged in selling our products through your distributor kind of network?" So it was a very similar feel, but just different, right? It was different. So it was an interesting challenge when I went over to Ingram Micro, but it was equally as fun.
Yeah.
Um, a different time, right? That was when, again, lots of trade shows, lots of in-persons, lots of, traveling around to all of the different clienteles and really building out these kind of massive plans throughout the year. And so, yeah, it was good. It was good. It was creative too. You had to kind of speak to the reseller, which is a very different customer, right? So these are guys that essentially are small businesses or ICs, or, they've got consulting firms. I mean, obviously there's some of them in there that are the larger firms that can go off and do their own thing, but majority of the time they are these small guys. And so you were having to really speak to them of saying, how can we benefit you? How can we distribute through you? What can we do together? So even though they were resellers, they were really partners. I mean, at the
Yeah,
end of the
for
day.
sure. Yeah, yeah, and out like I put they're in the same bucket these
Right.
days, 100%. Before we jump, I do want to talk about that a lot more, and
Yeah.
I'm making a mental note to go onto it. But there was something that you mentioned that I thought was really like a sentient point that I think is really important for people to digest, and I'd love to expand on it a tiny bit more first. So you said that when people move companies, they bring the agency with them because they made them look good.
Yes.
And like the my experience has been, if you can make the agency look good to their client, then you're going to be their favorite like tech partner. Like, lots of digital agencies used Optimizely with their
Yes.
customers to optimize their websites, and like if we could help make that agency look good to their end customer, then
Right.
like that would be really good for us as well. Like, what tips would you have? Obviously, you're doing some time traveling here, but
Yeah.
a lot of
It's
people
okay.
that listen to this show are trying to partner with agencies and
Yeah.
service providers, and I think
Yeah.
all of them are trying to make their customers look good and also make themselves look good to their customers. Like, what tips would you have, even to like develop that empathy and understand like how someone can make someone else look good in that kind of relationship?
So, what always made our relationships the most successful is that you genuinely had a passion for what your client is doing, right? So, for example, for us, we really genuinely understood the business of Ingram Micro. So, we had said, "Ingram, we think, right, XYZ is going to be the best foot forward to your resellers. Here's all the reasons why. This is all the research that backs that up. We've done studies, so on and so forth, and so on." So you want to really step into them and their business so that you're coming with your best foot forward and really giving them everything that you have and all of the strategy behind it. That also creates that level of trust, because then that person is seeing you as their advocate. There's somebody who is saying, "Hey, I understand you, I understand your business, and I understand the pressure that you're under to meet whatever goals or KPIs that you have. So here's how I can serve that for you. Here's how I can partner with you to do that as an agency." I mean, that's the rule of thumb with any partnership, but especially with agencies, you almost want to become an extension of them. And that's kind of the way to think about it. Think agencies are chameleons, right? They adapt to each of their clients and produce what they need.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good framing. And so, yeah, let's talk about the Ingram Micro ecosystem. I mean, I think everyone, like, resellers is a thorny topic. Everyone struggles
Ugh,
with,
I
but
know.
like, Amplitude resellers was our best business.
Yes.
So, it took the longest to set up, had the most challenges. So tell me a little bit about Ingram Micro's partner business, and
So
love to talk about
Ingram
resellers.
Yeah, Ingram was interesting. Ingram already had a reseller network and business because they started obviously, again, old school, right? These guys were the first distributors of hardware products. So I'm talking printers, toners, paper. I mean, we're 80s, 90s, like that is where they made their business. Well, when they got into the cloud space, they realized that they had this massive network of distributors and resellers that at their fingertips to essentially resell cloud product, right? And this was when it was more of a newer idea. So when we talk about, buying Microsoft, for example, remember when we have to go to the store and actually buy a box for the software, right? And check out. And then we go home and we put this CD in our computer and we're uploading it in the whole 9 yards, right? Well, when we got to cloud, what made it really great was now you're just clicking buy now and you're downloading from the cloud right on directly to your computer. Well, when you have distributors like that, they're already going out to all of their clients, old school and new, saying, hey, we're already controlling your entire IT space. We now have access to this. You don't need to go buy this stuff in bulk anymore. Let's just sell you, what you need by license and here you go. Right. So that can kind of completely disrupted the way that industry worked.
Hmm.
And so what a lot of people didn't realize was Ingram Micro and still is today, the biggest background distributor out there. So Microsoft uses Ingram Micro to completely distribute all of their products. Microsoft doesn't even do it on their own.
Yeah.
It's all through Ingram Micro. At least about 90% of it is. And so it's really, really interesting how it's kind of this network of just
Yeah.
crazy, right? This crazy spider web of how to really push it out there. Building the partner programs there were different, right? Because this is again going back to speaking to the resellers. So the resellers are like a lot of these guys that are ICs, one stop shops. They're not these massive sales teams or sophisticated sales processes or any of that stuff. Now, again, I'm speaking at the time, so it's been a
Hmm.
little time. I know there's been more sophistication since, but so they would use Ingram Micro to help them kind of set up not only their business but then resell all of those products that were available to them. Um, and so the programs that we had to create was on twofold. One, we had to create the programs for the resellers themselves to get them incentivized to resell, right, and distribute everything that we had in our catalog of Ingram. Then their second side of it was I'd also create a partner program for all the folks that we were then putting into our catalog for those resellers to sell. So that's who I mean by the Microsofts, the Googles, the Adobes, the SiteLocks, the all of those guys that were kind of more those originals in the cloud space that started distributing their licenses that way. And so the programs there were really interesting because we had to essentially make sure we were getting the attention of our customers, aka resellers, to then resell their or to sell their product or
Yeah.
distribute their product.
Yeah.
So we came up with all kinds of stuff. I mean, honestly, we had, which I think is funny. They still use the program that I built about 8 years ago now. They still use it. Obviously, there's been tweaks, thankfully. But they still use it. So it's a little bit of they do kind of program packaging. And then they also do, the Chinese menu where you can pick what you want to do. And here's what that means. And how this is how much it costs. And it's been a really interesting to see that they still use that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, it must work for them.
yeah, it works,
You know?
right?
Yeah,
Hey,
exactly. And I feel like when you're working with a massive network of
yes.
small companies like that, where anything you change
It's too
can
much
cause
to
a bunch
rock the
of
boat.
issues. Yeah,
Exactly. That's
exactly.
what I've heard. So I
Yeah.
keep close contact with everyone that I've ever
Awesome.
come across or have worked with. And they tell me all the time. I mean, some of the guys that are still there that I've worked with in the past, and they crack up because every time I talk to them, I'm at a different place and they're like, "Hey, you recognize this deck," and stuff like that. So it's been really funny to see that. But yeah, it was really, really fun to build that. And it created an additional revenue stream for Ingram Micro, which they didn't realize that they could do. They could start charging to essentially get in front of all of the distributors and resellers.
Yeah.
Um,
So smart.
yeah, it was great. So that first year that I had built that entire program, I mean, we pulled in at about an additional 25 million in revenue just on that side of the business, because all of those partners were paying to get in front of them, right? Different
Yeah.
events, different webinars, different ABM campaigns, whatever that was. We just started kind of, I hate saying it, nickel and diming them, and then now it's created an entire business that they still rely on at cloud at Ingram Micro. So
Yeah.
worked.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And so, like, a lot of people that listen to this and that are in the partnership leaders community are building programs for the
Yeah.
first time,
Yeah.
and like go thinking back to building that program, and like, okay, if you were going to redo it, say like Ingram Micro were like, hey, we have to have you back, Katie, and you were crazy enough to go back,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, what would you do differently if you, or and like what were the things that you would do the same, I guess, like when you're
Hmm.
designing a partner program from scratch?
So designing a partner program from scratch, something that I really learned a lot at Ingram was start small and then go big, right? Don't try to throw everything into the sink at once and see what sticks and what works, or what your partners want, or what they really react to. Um, and always start with the stuff that is easy lift or easy setup. So, I always tell people nowadays at Ingram, I wish that we had done this first, but I wish that we had really focused in on what the referral motion looked like, what the, account matching looked like up front and through those partnerships, and how to work together through that first before diving into, all the different integrations, all of the different marketing campaigns and things like that. Because most of the time, that's where you can play a little bit, where you can really see where are the matchups of our customers, and what are they reacting towards as partners, right? When you try to do it all at once, it almost is like it's a slower start, right, to the partnership, because you're starting so many different ways, instead of starting in one place, making it successful, then building on top of that and adding from there, and kind of making it more robust as you go and as time goes, because you're going to learn a lot about your customer and what they actually want.
Yeah.
That's something I definitely, especially on integrations, that's what I learned early and fast. You always go into it thinking that this is the way we got to do it, this is the way our customers want it. And then once you spent now 6 months of work and development, you launch this thing and you realize your customers are like, this is great and all, but it would have been better if we had this, right? So I think that's my biggest learning, especially at Ingram. That was something, obviously pretty much their entire backbone is all about integrations, and how they all play with each other, how do they surface in each other's platforms and things like that. And I think you never want to assume that what the customer wants until you actually start asking your customers, asking your partners, really looking for those gold nuggets of what does it mean to be a partner, and what does it mean for that integration. That's definitely something I think, I've learned for sure.
Awesome. I absolutely love that. Yeah. And like, what was it like, was there anything that you found where you were surprised, or that it did just make sense, that like really incentivized these partners to work with you and focus on the program that you'd put together? I feel like a lot of the time with resellers, I was just having a call with my strategic partnerships team like
Yeah.
2 hours ago, and we were talking about our resellers, and we've got some awesome resellers. And also, you're always in competition with the other tools that they sell, even
Right.
though they're in different industries or different solutions. The whole thing
Yep.
is like you're competing for mind share. And so
Yes.
very often it's like you do need to capture people's attention and stay top of mind. And I would love to hear a little bit about how you managed to do that there with that program.
Well, so it's a little different now. So I wouldn't necessarily say follow all the same things, but at the
Yeah.
time, the stuff that really worked well was a lot of the in-person events, right? A lot of, really getting in front of the reps, spending time with them, right? We actually at the time had what we call dedicated heads, which essentially was, somebody we hired that represented, for example, Microsoft, and all they did was they would roadshow around to all of our resellers, obviously in partnership with Microsoft and their budget and what they paid for. They would go out there and really kind of be the hoorah to the resellers to say, hey, this is why we're awesome. Microsoft is great. How can I help you? What's coming up with your customers? Again, they were that kind of, cheerleader and champion. Now that still applies today. It's just obviously what's made it different is we're doing a lot less of this in-person stuff, which
Hmm.
I've seen obviously is coming back, but there's still a little bit of that trepidation for all from, the lovely pandemic. So I think, what would really work today with resellers is you really just need to have a very close relationship with them and make sure that the relationships that you do have are are easily multiplied with those champions. So make sure it's not just one person from that reseller that you're chatting with that's, supposed to be that internal champion. Make
Hmm.
sure it's multiple people within that organization and reseller that are really pushing for your product and keeping their teams right at their top of mind for your product.
Yeah.
That's what worked really well for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so then you moved from Ingram Micro to ZoomInfo, and ZoomInfo at that time. Now ZoomInfo is also kind of a traditional player, but at
Yes.
the time that was probably like very
So I actually in between, I had
oh,
web.com in between.
okay. Yeah.
So I was there for a few years and then moved on to I actually was at Allstate and then ZoomInfo,
Yeah.
but it's all a blur at this point.
Well, I think ZoomInfo was the next like
That
specific
was a
partnerships role, right?
Yes, that was my really specific partnerships role. When I was brought on there, ZoomInfo had what they called partnerships, but it really wasn't. It was more of all the kind of redheaded stepchild relationships that they had either with different customers or different agencies, and some of their enterprise groups, and they kind of would, they were all these on their own island programs and it just nothing was really cohesive or being brought together. So I was a part of the team that, built the entire ecosystem. And then I specifically focused on the strategic partnerships there, which meant pretty much all of the enterprise relationships. What did that look like? How did that work together? Whether they were um, integration relationships, or if they were marketplace relationships, or if they were, those traditional cloud relationships. Those all came under my camp, and then that's all I worked on while I was at ZoomInfo. And what's really fun about that now is even though I've moved on from ZoomInfo, what they have today is now you're starting to see all this stuff in the market, which takes, as I'm sure sometimes years, right, to come together. Seeing all the announcements that they've been making, especially in the last 6 months, year for AWS, Google, Microsoft, all the fun stuff that they're doing there with, their cloud and distribution of the data, within your infrastructures. It's kind of cool. I get to have like a little bit of a smile at home because I'm like, I did that. Obviously, definitely not by myself. There was massive team behind it, and there still is today that are just working their tails off to make that all happen. But it's really cool to be able to say like, hey, that's something that I was a part of, and that's something that's obviously creating a lot of success for them today.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, absolutely love that. And so, like, what did the partner program and like, what did it look like there, and how did it differ to what you were doing at Ingram Micro? I guess.
So, what made it really different? So, I mean, honestly, you're doing a lot of the same plays over and over, right? It's how do you get the attention of your mutual customers and how do you get them to buy each other's products, right? Let's if we just oversimplify it. Um, what was different about ZoomInfo, though, was it was a little bit of a strategic play in every single partner you were talking to, because there were a multitude of ways that you could play together, right? Mainly just because ZoomInfo is a data house, right? They are through and through data house. They are kings of the hill right now. They have all of the data that all of these organizations want and need. And yet all these different organizations are ingesting that data in a very different way. And so it was really important to partner with the right people and partner with the right groups in order to facilitate that to all the customers. So even though there are a lot of large partnerships there that you hear about mostly in PR, there's also a lot of small ones in there too that were surfacing up that, people didn't realize was there. A lot of the integrations obviously is key to that too. So integrations with Salesforce, integrations with Zoho, integrations with Microsoft and Dynamics and things like that. So it was important to have those. Developing the relationships, every single one had to be treated a bit differently, because each of those organizations obviously have their very own ideas of what a partnership is and what it
Hmm.
means and what do you do together. I mean, let's be real, the massive giants like the Googles and the Microsofts and AWS, it's pretty much you pay to play, number one, and number two, you follow their lead. They tell you this is what we want out of you, or this is what you have available to you, and you can't deviate from that.
Yeah.
The only time you get to deviate from that is if you have very close relationships with leadership or something like that, that then trickles down to those programs, and then you can kind of go outside the box a little bit. I was really fortunate that I've just carried a lot of relationships through. So from my Ingram Micro days and so forth, I have a lot of relationships in all of those organizations, pretty high up. And so I was able to kind of negotiate a little bit different terms than the typical sign up here. Everything's automated. There's no, again, deviation from the standard terms. This is all we offer every partner. With ZoomInfo at the time, right? They was even just a few years ago, they were kind of the new kid on the block. Everybody wanted to work with them. Everybody had seen their value. And so it was a lot easier for me to have those conversations with those leaders to say, hey, this is why you need to work with us. And this is why we're going to do it different than how you do it with everybody else. So we were really fortunate in that way. And I was able to kind of negotiate outside the color outside the box, as they would say, or color outside the lines. And it works really well. I mean, they're killing it. I mean, honestly, I think they realize it's very mutually beneficial, right? So as ZoomInfo grew, their business grew as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then,
Yeah,
so I'd love to talk about because I saw that you started your own kind of advisory
I did.
effort,
Yeah.
and I'd love to talk a little bit about that and the kind of work that you do there. And then and then I think we'll have time also to talk about what you're working on now, which is obviously
Yes.
really important.
Yes.
But I'd love to go there. Like, so my wife runs her own like one person advisory at the moment as well, and it seems like an amazing job. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm very jealous. But I would love to, yeah, learn about what you do as that part of
Yeah,
your.
yeah. So Elevate Group just came out of, pure need and necessity. I had so many people approaching me just through the network and through partnerships, asking for advice, asking for help, asking to consult, saying, hey, we saw you did this here. How do you think we could do it here? And so it was one of those things that I kept pretty underground for a while, because it was really just a word of mouth type of thing, or any of my existing network would reach out to me and I would build them through Elevate and so forth. And again, it was just really simply there to help with that. Um, I've gotten much busier with it these days, and so it's become a little bit more active, as I say. I've got a couple people actually working under me now with Elevate, and bringing in deals all over the place. Mainly, just we're helping a lot of those mid market and SMB groups trying to break into the different partnerships, figuring out what their basic strategy should be and how they can essentially implement them for their organizations. And sometimes it's just one-off conversations where they're just said, hey, this is the one problem we have you had this before? What would you do, or how have you
Yeah.
done it in the past? because again, I've been everywhere from the little itty bitty guys all the way up to these massive organizations with huge teams, all that stuff. And so it's kind of nice because I have a bit of that perspective of what's reality and then what is, what do you want to do to scale that long term. So that's kind of where Elevate came from and why I have it. So that's just my little side gig that works out for now. And, always happy to lend a hand and always happy to help anywhere I can.
Yeah,
So,
amazing. And quite a few people from the partnership leaders community have kind of gone out and have their own
yeah,
advisory
yeah,
side hustle, side gig type things as well. Like there's a ton of great folks. And I think what's really awesome about that is, and we kind of touched upon this a little bit before, like in the, I don't know what it's called, the green room or whatever people
yeah.
say, right? Like, before we started this, that both of us don't necessarily have a proclivity for this type of in the limelight, like
Yes.
type behavior. And a lot
No,
of partnerships people like kind of hide in the background.
it's true.
That's what we do a lot of the time. And so what ends up happening, I think, is like quite often people that aren't like that and end up being the advisors and the thought leaders and everything else are often people that actually have no idea what they're talking about. And it like and it
It's
and
true.
I encountered a lot of these people when I was working at an awesome VC firm. Like, and the
Yeah,
people that worked at the VC firm were great,
of
but like a lot of
course.
the advisors and people that we met that like wanted to be recommended to our customers, you meet and you'd be like, this person knows nothing about what they're talking about. Like they're a sales advisor, but like they've
Yeah.
never really closed the deal. Like they
It's
don't know any of this stuff.
I really have noticed it's that those who can't do teach completely applies.
Yeah,
But you're right. Yeah, we were talking about this and partnership leader community. It's kind of funny what I've been kind of capping as. I mean, you're one of them, Asher's one of them, Chris is one of them. I mean, there's a whole list. I mean, keep calling us the OGs a little bit, right? Because we're the ones that have actually been around since before partnerships was a quote unquote thing, right? And we were the ones that were really developing these kind of gold standards and processes and principles. And we've been there, done that, right? And so now it's funny that partnerships, especially in the market today, have become such a focus. And now they're looking for people who really has the experience that's done this
yeah,
before. And a lot of them have, learned from it. They'll hire these guys that are, 10-year sales guys that somehow hid themselves into partnerships, and then they think that they're partner leaders, and then they come on board, and the organization ends up realizing that that was the wrong move, because partnerships isn't all just sales, right? You can't just be a sales guy. You truly have to be a strategist. You truly need to understand business, and you have to be able to look at it as a business. um so I think it's just so funny. And now it's everybody's like, you've done it before. What did you do in this scenario? Or, how did this work for you in the past? And what didn't work? And,
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. But everything evolves, right? So by no means are we the end all be all,
for
right?
sure.
By no means, I mean, I'm learning new things every day. But it's always fun to have those conversations of being like, remember when, remember
Yeah,
when we used to do this? Remember when we used to argue what partnerships really meant for the organizations? And we were always kind of seen as the like red-headed stepchild, or, something like that, that's off on their own island. Yeah, it's partnerships. They're doing their thing. We don't
yeah.
really
I
know what
think
they're
that's
doing out
probably.
there.
I think a lot of people are living that rather than remembering it still.
Yes. Yes.
And so, like, I imagine, like, crossing that chasm of,
Yeah.
hey, like, lo- lots of people asking you for feedback and you saying, yeah, sure, I'm happy to jump on a call and talk about it, to this is valuable enough that I should be charging for my time.
Yes.
Like, because I would love people that are listening to this to be empowered to do something similar, right? Because, like,
Yeah.
I think it's really important. And also, like, people will just ask you for free time all the time.
Yes.
And like, any tips for people on like kind of making that transition?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's really all about how much effort are you putting in and how much are you delivering to that person that's asking from you. I mean, if it's just a quick conversation, that's one thing. If it's,
Mhm.
hey, I need help fully developing this strategy. I need, you to write out what your top 3 things that you would do, or, anytime that you're taking it a step further and really producing something for them or really delivering on something for them, that's when you can start saying, "Hey, look, my time is valuable. Even though this only took me, an hour, let's say, to pull together, and even then, sometimes that's a lot." You just want to make sure that you value yourself and your time, and that you're just making it clear to them, saying, "Hey, look, I'm providing this to you as a service or as a benefit. This is my typical hourly rate, and this is why." And most of the time, people, honestly, that was my first thing I learned is I was so scared. I kept thinking people are not going to pay me for what I'm telling them. Who would pay me for this, right? But you'd be really surprised. People are really respectful of that, and at the end of the day, they value you and they value your time, and so that's why they're gonna, pay out for those items that they're asking for or anything that you produce for them. So
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
be afraid.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's good advice. So like last thing, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you're doing in your role today. And I
Yeah.
think the if we think about like the most actionable things that people would love to hear about, that one is like, hey, how did you, like, obviously you've kind of made a transition into a broader scoped role with this
Yes.
new role, and then also and so I think that that would be really cool to talk about, like, hey, how did you do that, or
Yeah.
prepare yourself for that transition, because I think that that's really interesting. And then the other thing, as we touched upon, is like, yeah, partnerships are often trying to define what they mean within a business, and like
Yeah.
there's a lot of mess around that. And now that you're in like more of a broader leadership role, you
Yeah.
probably have a perspective on like,
I
hey, I
do.
wish you would just do this,
Yes. Yeah.
and so I'd love to touch on both of those before we wrap up.
Yeah, so I'm at Sales Impact Academy now. We are a clear startup. I mean, we're still in our seed funding area. Luckily, we've come up with quite a bit of funding. Essentially, we're a education software company. Again, not an education tech platform, but we actually specify in training and teaching on go to market um, excellence. So
Yeah,
when we talk about, AEs and how to close a deal and negotiate through indecision, all the way to, SDRs and cold calling boot camps, and how do you actually get, um, you know, that response back from those customers. At the same time, our biggest belief is kind of what we talked about before, right? A lot of the folks that we have teaching are actual doers every single day. So we have CEOs, CROs, sales leaders that are all from the active tech space today, right? So HubSpot and Go and G2 and quite a few others, and they actually teach, hey, this is what I do with my sales team. These are
yeah.
the experiences that I have today. This is what works today, right? That's what makes SIA very, very different. And they
Mhm.
also are agnostic, so they teach every sales methodology out there. SIA, we are not hooked on one and that's the only type that we deliver. We just want to bring the most excellent coaches and programming that's available and bring that to the forefront for organizations to teach the foundations to any of their new hires that are coming into their organization. And so, that's something that makes SIA really different. Now, when I was originally brought on with SIA, I honestly was brought on just to focus on all the partnerships, because SIA is obviously kind of a bit of that middleman. They
Yeah,
have their students and their end clients that are purchasing the platform, but then they also have their entire network of these coaches and teaching and things like that. And that's where they had a lot of these partnerships, because that's where they kind of pulled all of their resources to essentially create this ecosystem, right?
yeah.
And so they brought me in as a partner leader because they just started getting approached by all of these different enterprise groups that wanted to either resell them or have them integrated somehow into their product bundling. And they wanted to, do a whole slew of things. And so Paul brought me in and then I started working on all of that. And what we quickly found was, and why my role has shifted over the last, 9 months, was because everything that I was doing was actually affecting our entire funnel. So
Hmm.
all the way from tofu to bofu, and partnerships had this common thread all the way through that funnel. And so that's where they shifted my role to be more of, the strategic kind of revenue leader, so that I got down, I bring everything in as far as top of funnel, middle funnel, and bottom of funnel. And then I also have to figure out, okay, how does that affect our sales teams? How does that affect our marketing teams? How do we, go against that? And then, obviously grow the revenue for the organization in that way.
Yeah.
So it's put me in a really unique position. I will say, obviously, there's some stuff that's new to me, right? Comp plans, for example, I will say is not my strong suit. I had to learn real quickly on those ones. Obviously, so partner comp plans, right? I've had partner teams and I've had everybody you could think of under that type of partner team and their comp plans. But when it came to AEs and SDRs and those specific, they're just sales, it's a different beast. Let me just tell you. I mean, it's a lot of the same ideals, but it's a different beast. And so I think that was something that I had to pick up really quickly and obviously learn very quickly from our CFO. So I definitely bow down to all of those who are just comp plan geniuses that know how to work those to the best of their advantage, because that is definitely something that, I'm trying to hone my skills with. But it's been really fun kind of looking at it in that way.
Hmm.
Um, and treating our organization, kind of going back to treating our organization like it's just one big ecosystem, that everything is feeding each other, quite honestly. And that's what, SIA is kind of has given me that space to do that. So it's been really fun to do that.
That's awesome. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear it. Yeah. And so last question that we like to ask is, what's something that you learned recently that you'd like to share with people that are listening today?
Oh man, there's been so much that I've learned over my career. I think we've touched on a couple of them, to be honest. I think, obviously one, like I said, always start small and then go big. Don't try to, throw everything into the kitchen sink, because it's just not as successful that way, right? Like, do something to the highest possible, success and effort before moving on to the next thing. Um, Another thing that I've really learned recently is just how much the market has changed and how much organizations, especially with kind of the uncertainty we're seeing in the market today, how much they're realizing that partnerships are almost their, golden spear that they're using to get through some of these tough times, right?
Hmm.
Because, obviously the way buyer behaviors are completely different these days.
Yeah.
It's all about trust. It's all about, being, knowledgeable. It's all about being the leader in the space, and that then they come to you, right? Because there's so much research they can do on their own out there to figure out if they want to buy your product or not. It's not about you being the ooh shiny. It's about what are other people saying.
Hmm.
And that's where partnerships are becoming vital in that area. I mean, honestly, that's you're going to get tangibly further in building customer trust through your partnerships and relationships than you are single-handedly by yourself. I think it's just such an important thing, and I love to see that more and more of these larger organizations are even coming out and publicly saying things like that.
Hmm.
Um, I know. I think it was like 6 months ago or something. Dell CEO came out and said, "Hey, 80% of our sales these days are all through our partner network." That's a big statement to make. And
Yeah.
Microsoft actually, I think, said something really similar as well, because that's why they doubled down on how their entire partner ecosystem works, and the way that they reward and changing kind of everybody to the same standard.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
95% of their it's 95% of their kind of like Office 365. I can't remember
yes,
what they call it, like Microsoft Business Cloud or something like
yes,
that, but
yes.
95% of that is through partners.
Right, which is, if you really
Ingram
think about
Micro
it,
is probably a chunk
yeah,
of it.
and Ingram Micro is probably a big chunk of that,
Yeah,
yes. Um, yeah, so I think that's just so cool to see now, especially, again, being around this space for so long, and, like, we've been fighting for so long. Partnerships are so important, and now I think organizations are really seeing that and seeing the
yeah.
value in it. I'm glad to see that there's much more of a focus and effort
Yeah,
going into it.
yeah, I feel you on that, and it definitely seems like something that's getting prioritized earlier and
Yes.
recognized as a valuable part of the business,
Right. An
which is
actual
awesome.
strategy arm too,
Yeah,
right? It's not just something that's seen as, oh yeah, it's partnered, they're doing what they want. It's now becoming an actual pillar in the main, company strategy, which is great. It's good to
yeah,
see. So
yeah. Awesome, awesome. Well,
yeah,
thank you so much, Katie, for joining me, and really interesting stuff that I know people are going to love listening to. So appreciate the time today, and yeah, can't wait for people to hear this.
same. Happy to be here.
Thank you.